President Trump earlier saying he's deploying the National Guard to the nation's capital and placing police under federal control now. Let's bring in D.C. Police Union Chairman Gregory Pemberton. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. So from your view, is this necessary?
Well, look, we completely agree with the president that crime in the District of Columbia is out of control and something needs to be done with it. We have to go back to how we got here, though. In 2020, the D.C. City Council passed an enormous amount of legislation that handcuffs police officers, exposes them to administrative, civil, and even criminal liability, even when they do their jobs properly. And now, 5 years later, our authorized sworn strength is 4,000 sworn police officers. We currently have 3,180. So we have more than 800 vacancies for the position of police officer. And the way the department makes up for that gap is through 2 million hours of mandatory overtime every year.
This train station every single day on my way to work, and I have not seen it like this. You can see a National Guard Humvee behind me. And we've seen, I don't know, Josh, if you can pan over, there are a couple National Guardsmen who are walking across the street over there. We have Humvees basically at each corner of the train station here on a fairly busy Thursday afternoon. And this is what you can expect here in the coming days. Let's pan over there. You can see another Humvee there. This is what you can expect over the next 30 days and possibly a lot longer after that, Jess, because we know just yesterday President Trump said that they are planning to indefinitely extend their federalization of MPD and really ramp up federal law enforcement resources here in the district. It's not just National Guard. We have also seen Homeland Security officers, DEA officers, Park Police. There were vehicles here just a little bit earlier. This is one of the areas of focus that we have heard a lot of concerns about, crime around Union Station, people who are loitering outside. I will tell you, as somebody who walks this route all the time, it does seem like there are fewer people just sort of hanging around.
Yes, what we're watching right now is, I guess, a bulldozer or an earth mover or a device that is moving things in Washington, D.C. Okay, you got a little ambient noise right there. The homeless encampments are coming down. President Trump is serious about this. He's going to take the homeless encampments down. He's flooded the zone with troops and also park rangers and others, Border Patrol. Judge Janine actually indicted a guy yesterday. He's in the process of indicting a guy for a felony for throwing a sub sandwich at a Customs and Border guy and calling him a fascist right in his face. President Trump said no more spitting on him. Those days are over. President Trump's finished playing games. He's going to clean out Washington, D.C., and then he's going to get the graffiti off the buildings and the monuments. And people spraying monuments, like he said, he went back. There's a 200-year-old law. It's 10 years in prison. He's had enough of it.
Hey, good evening. It's August 14th, and this is episode 47 of The Whiners. Ryan, Jeff, Morgan, your hosts, and our guest, Dr. Carol Lieberman, known as America's Psychiatrist, is going to be joining us for the first half hour to discuss, well, what's going on in D.C. It looks like chaos. It looks like dictatorship, some say. It looks, well, we'll have to talk about that in just a moment.
What we need, if you ask me.
Some people are saying it's just what we need. But before we get to that topic, I want to know what wine or other beverage is everybody drinking?
All right. Well, we have Dr. Carol for only a limited time, so let's get through this quickly.
Absolutely.
I'm drinking a California Syrah rated 92 by Wine Enthusiast, and it's really good.
All right. How about you, Morgan? I put you on the spot.
I know. I was so sorry. I drink water, so this is another water day, guys.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Dr. Carol, how about you? Did you happen to bring a glass of wine or something like that?
No, I didn't. I didn't want that to mess with my articulation.
Exactly.
But I have a sparkling water and I have a smoothie.
Very nice. Okay, creative.
Neither is good as wine.
I decided to get myself a French blend. Look at that, Jeff. $8.99 at my local grocery store. It's
Getting
shocking.
frugal. I like
know.
that.
It's
Very
shocking. All right. Well, I do want to jump right in, Dr. Carol. Let me say a few more things about you. You are known as America's psychiatrist and also the terrorist therapist. Whoa. You have a podcast called Dr. Carol's Couch on voiceamerica.com. And I think you also have the Terrorist Therapist podcast as well.
Yeah.
You're a forensic psychiatrist. You're an expert witness. You're a best-selling author. So you really have quite a background there. And so I would like to, first of all, because I believe that what Donald Trump is doing in Washington, D.C., which people have said is unprecedented, is part of his ending crime and disorder on America's streets policy. But you are coming at this from the standpoint of the work on the psychiatric element of this thing. And so maybe that's where our focus initially will be. I just want to say that the United States as a whole in 1997 had 254 psychiatric hospitals. By 2015, that was reduced to less than 200. In 2001, I was part of a fight to save DC General Hospital. And of course, the city of DC was going bankrupt back then. So what do you see in light of the fact that we've got these kinds of things going on across the country, really, can be done? And what do you think is actually going on here?
Well, the big problem, as you just were saying, the reason why we have all these homeless is because they closed the psychiatric hospitals, the state mental hospitals. And the people, who were, made to leave them ended up either in jails and prisons or on the streets. The homeless population is made up primarily of people with psychotic disorders, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder, manic depressive disorder, and addictions. And you can't just pour them on the street, and say goodbye and expect them to get the proper treatment. Because, the problem is that when they decided to close the hospitals, first of all, a lot of it was the pressure to, these whole horrible hospitals. It was thought it was the vision of Cuckoo's Nest. That's the problem. People thought that, these are really dangerous hospitals. I mean, they did long ago do some lobotomies in those hospitals, but they haven't been doing it for years. And
the
they don't do it
articles
now.
say that the hospitals themselves were dictatorship. Now Donald Trump, by saying clean things up, is pushing dictatorship. So, which is it?
Well, when the people were let out of the hospitals, the idea was they were supposed to go, the buzzword was the least restrictive environment. And so that was thought to be, free in the streets and in their apartments or wherever they're going to go. Really not much thought was given to that. I mean, there was the idea of using money to build community clinics. And the hope was that the people would go from the hospital, from being in these chronic mental hospitals for years, to being able to go to the clinics, like for, once a week, once a month. But when you have people who are schizophrenic, who are psychotic, or who are on, drugs or alcohol, and they're not able to get themselves to a community clinic, even if there were enough of them to take care of them, which there weren't. So the whole idea was a big mistake. Obviously, people did not consult to the people who were making these decisions, and it's just been a bust. And all these attempts to solve the problem, in since then, have not worked because, because for one thing, like if you take a person and you bring them to an apartment, like in California, they made these small homes, the new fashioned little homes.
Right.
And they made new homes, and they brought the people, the homeless people, into these homes, and they thought that would solve the problem. Well, it didn't, because first of all, they didn't want to stay in these homes because, well, they didn't have, they weren't given treatment, they weren't given skills to get a job. It was just because there were these roofs, they were supposed to all of a sudden be cured and be able to live happily ever after.
Dr. Carol, I lived where you live now for about 26 years, and I moved to North Carolina in September of 2023. And one of the reasons I moved was because of the homeless situation. And specifically, the feeling I had that there was no energy to do anything about it. There was no sense of like, we're not going to tolerate this. It just seemed to me like it's going to go on forever. And I started asking around about it, and you're probably familiar with this. Apparently there was a court ruling that the police can't remove homeless people from the street until there's enough beds for them or enough shelters, whatever the word is. It wasn't that, you can't remove them, but you can't remove them until there's enough beds. So now here we have Trump taking his action. So what do you know about the legal aspect of this? And I don't think it's ideal to remove them before there's beds, but there's got to be something has to give. Something has to happen first. How do you see this unfolding?
Well, I'm really very curious about what he has planned for them. He's giving them a choice, either to leave somewhere or to get help or to or to jail, which of course is not appropriate for homeless people. But unless they're also criminals, which some of them are. But I've been wondering, where did he come up with a psychiatric hospital? There are some state hospitals that haven't been used since they made the patients leave. There are things that can be done with the hospitals that still exist, but they need to build more. A lot more. And so I'm not sure where he's sending these people. I think it's great that he's doing what he's doing. I think particularly in terms of the criminals, it's I know there are some people who say it's fascist or whatever, but it's time that somebody did something to get these criminals off the streets. But the law, every state is a little different, but in general, it's if you are a danger to yourself or a danger to others or gravely disabled, meaning that you can't put a roof over your head and you can't feed yourself or clothe yourself, those are the criteria to be involuntarily hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. But and that's been the law for a long time. In New York and in California, but in New York, I trained at NYU Bellevue, and I was chief resident in my last year. And part of my job was to sort of be an assistant administrator at the Manhattan Psychiatric Hospital. So I have a lot of experience with this. And then when I came to California for a while, I consulted to Metropolitan State Hospital. I, went around to the different floors, and the people would tell me the problems that they were having with the various patients, and I would consult with them and tell them how to handle it. And these were places where people were kept safe. But I was trying to say, so in New York, if there would be somebody who met those criteria or even, other things, we would just hospitalize them right away, we didn't really, it wasn't like pussyfooting because we knew that the better thing for them would be in the hospital to get treatment, not walking around on the street. But when I got to California, I was very surprised that there would be people coming into, I was connected to Cedars, and there would be people coming into the emergency room, and they would have a hard time finding doctors, psychiatrists, or now they've even let psychologists do it, to do a 2PC certificate, 2 physician certificate. A lot of the physicians didn't want to do it because they didn't want to take the responsibility of putting somebody in the hospital in case the patient would sue them after. Now, that just boggles my mind, still boggles my mind, because that's what these people need. You can't,
Doesn't
even
the
if it's
hospital
not
protect them in a situation like that?
Well,
what's the word when you take responsibility away from somebody else? I forgot what the legal term is. Doesn't the hospital?
well, I mean,
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Well, what is
What's
that,
that?
Morgan?
It's on the tip of my tongue. I can't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
well, I mean, you thinking involuntarily hospitalize them, or Baker Act in Florida? It's the Baker
No,
Act.
I mean,
there
you take
are
away the
things
legal. You take away the liability from the doctor. The hospitals don't do that. Where they take away the liability, and they incur the liability, not the individual.
I don't know.
doctor.
I don't know how much.
All right. Well, let me ask you another question. I mean, obviously, it would take time to build new hospitals. What do you think about establishing temporary emergency hospitals? I don't mean to militarize this. This is just an analogy. But in a war situation, the military is able to set up places to give medical treatment to the troops very quickly.
Yes.
So what about doing
Yes.
something like that?
Sure. I mean, the thing isn't so much about how luxurious the roof is, how luxurious their quarters are. These tiny homes are fine, but it's about what services are being provided. It's about having psychiatrists for all these people, having social workers for them to help them make plans for reintegrating into society. Some of them aren't able to reintegrate into society, and that's why those are the people who primarily needed the state hospitals. So it's more about the personnel that is important than how pretty the roof is.
Dr. Carroll, what you are making me think of immediately is the old Hill-Burton standard of medical care in the United States. And I don't remember the details, but I remember there was so many hospital beds per 1,000 of the population in each county, so many required research facilities, because what you've outlined, and even when I read the executive order from the president where he says, for example, that the overwhelming majority of homeless are addicted to drugs, have these mental health conditions, or if you look at DC with the 38.6% increase in violent crimes, which is triple the closest city, that this is something that churches, charities, they can't possibly deal with that. Furthermore, I think in New York City, where they were putting homeless people into hotels, things like that. Well, they didn't necessarily want to go to those hotels. So the city or the state was leasing the space, but they were empty in many cases.
Right. Yes, that's what I was talking about before with the little homes in California. It's kind of a similar story.
So in other words, you have to have a rapid increase in medical personnel and facilities. So sort of like an Apollo program, maybe, to launch the development of American healthcare again. Well, not into space, but
yes. It needs to be. That's why I was saying I'm not really sure where these people are going. I hope they have. So even people who aren't homeless, just normal people, who have families and whatever, but they may feel suicidal, or they may be bipolar and have a psychotic break. And they go into hospitals, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily. But the hospitals want to get them out. There isn't, because they're even in regular hospitals that have some psych wards, they want to get them out within 72 hours. Well, for involuntary, at 72 hours, the person is allowed to ask for a court hearing if they still want to get out. And so a judge or someone in the legal profession comes to the hospital and hears these different cases. But what I'm trying to say is that they're shoving people out, even people who aren't homeless, because there isn't enough room, because the insurance companies aren't paying enough for the hospitals to take care of them. I mean, I was mentioning Cedars, like I was on staff at Cedars, And Cedars had a great, they had 3 units at least, from what I remember, and they closed them because they couldn't support it because the insurance companies weren't paying enough for the care that these people needed. And I'm not talking about homeless necessarily, just in general, patients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree that this angle of the closing of mental hospitals does play a large aspect into what we see today. I mean, that and the injection of fentanyl in the streets, our veterans not having adequate care. But I am always wary about giving the government more control, militarizing police forces. What I worry about is that you see, National Guard being deployed either to LA or now to DC, that you're, I guess, in a sense, desensitizing them to interact with the American population in a way that is combative. Mm-hmm. So I'm very weary of that. And then this Washington Post article that talks about the Pentagon's plan to have these National Guard on ready 24/7 to deploy at this sign of civil unrest. We have a lot of the protesters going against what the genocide that's happening in Palestine, being met
genocide. Excuse me. There's no genocide happening in Palestine.
Okay,
it's terrorists. It's terrorists that Israel is trying to prevent from continuing to have another October 7th.
Well, I would say that the forced starvation of children and the bombing of tents is
inexcusable,
and I don't want my government.
They are not starving children. It's Hamas who's taking the food that Israel is bringing into Gaza. So it's Gaza has great publicists. Gaza has better publicists than Israel does, and the media is just believing them. But no, something even just came out just recently. There are articles and there are things online where Hamas or the people in Gaza have said that, and there are pictures, there's video. I know, people who want to believe that it's genocide say that these videos are fake. It's AI. But no, I mean, this is something that I know about, and I feel very strongly as the terrorist therapist. I feel very strongly about.
I feel strongly about it too. You see the images of children with basically their heads from these bombs, and they're American bombs. So that's why I feel, compelled to call it a genocide when you see that you have the Israeli government that is withholding, they have control of the borders, the air, the sea. These people can't get out. I don't know.
You are misinformed. I'm sorry, but you are misinformed. The UN and the other people who are trying to bring food and other supplies into Gaza the supplies are being stolen by the Hamas terrorists. And some people are starving. Some people, there have been pictures recently. A lot of people in Gaza look very well fed, but some of them aren't getting the supplies because the Hamas is taking them because then they sell them to the people in Gaza.
Okay, so we have this new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation whistleblower, the former Green Beret Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, who is talking about the Israeli Defense Force opening fire on these civilians who are getting aid. They even said that they said directly to this Anthony Aguilar character, "Why are you feeding the enemy?" So when he's giving food to children, this IDF forces are basically claiming these children as enemies. Look, I don't find that acceptable.
One of the things that Hamas does to try to win the war, or the war that they started, is to hold children and adults, for that matter, in front of them, so that if the IDF shoots at them or does anything to attack them, then they can say, "Oh, look, the IDF is killing these children." I mean, what about all the hostages that have been there for 2 years?
I'm not a seer to be a pro-Hamas advocate. I think we can condemn the actions of October 7th, but every single action that's happened after October 7th by the Israeli government is also condemnable, and that's where I stand.
Look,
so.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You should get better informed. What you're
All
saying
right.
is absolutely wrong.
All right. Well, in the limited time we have, let me turn the focus back to homelessness. And I'll use as a segue that we're talking about bad behavior, criminal behavior, alleged or real, whatever it might be. And the situation in D.C. is not only about homelessness. And in future episodes, I want to get legal experts on, police experts, to talk about the other aspects. But they also overlap a little bit. And I'm wondering what you can tell us, Carol, about to what extent the homeless population is committing crimes.
Well, yes, some of the homeless commit crimes. Of course, they're more often the victims of crimes than committers of crimes, perpetrators. But, especially if they start, see, some of the people who become homeless, it's a whole mixed group. Some of them have psychoses, like I was talking about, or addictions. Some of them are people who, got fired and couldn't afford to pay their rent anymore. And so it's a kind of a mixture. But the thing is, even the people who started out with not having any mental problems, if they end up on the streets, it's a very hard environment. And some of them end up either committing crimes or becoming addicted to things, or, it's very hard to survive in that. But I think they need more protection than to be put in jail. So I hope not a lot of them end up in jail, but certainly the criminals, I hope they come to other cities and do the same thing to other cities. I mean, it's like, you remember when Trump said, this is a long time ago, when he was saying, if I could stand in the middle of, was it Fifth Avenue or Park Avenue or something like that, and shoot somebody and they wouldn't attack me or they wouldn't blame me. Things have changed a lot because he's been doing a lot of making a lot of changes. And that actually, it's great, but some people feel very uncomfortable with change. So that's part of it, and yes, of course, when you have people in uniform and carrying guns and all that, it can be threatening and frightening and intimidating, and it can bring up some PTSD, trigger some PTSD in people who have been in situations where the National Guard came in, or like in war, or like in natural disasters or something. So there is that. But I think the ultimate goal of getting these criminals off the street is so much more important than that. And I think people will eventually come to appreciate it.
Well, I'm not trying to turn them into criminals. But one thing I wonder about is when we're talking about the type of homeless person who doesn't really function well, they're incoherent, so forth and so on. They're living in a tent. They don't seem to have any mailing address or anything. I say to myself, boy, I don't think they can even receive benefits like food stamps or anything like that. So how do they survive? Is it just based on people giving them some scraps out on the street, or are they getting their sustenance? I'm sure it's not any gourmet meal, but they've got to eat to some degree. How do they survive?
Well, some of them steal food, but that's not the majority. Some of them, there are some programs that deliver food to the homeless. But yeah, you're so right. Like when they don't even have a post box, a mailbox, a postal address, it is very hard to get benefits. I mean, it's kind of like it's just a world where everything is just too hard to get. Of course they feel helpless, and then if there's mental illness included in that, it's even harder for them just under good circumstances to get help, get support from the government. Or that's why what needs to happen is hospitals, whether they're temporary, emergency hospitals that are built up, or whether they're hotels or something. But the main thing is getting them the people who can help guide them back into life.
All right. Well, we're at the half-hour mark, and we want to respect the time commitment we made. So if you need to leave at this point, we understand.
Sure.
But I do want to make sure that the folks know about at least a couple of your books. This is your most recent one here, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists. Oh, my. Let me take a wild guess, Dr. Carroll. You are against terrorism.
Yes. This all started with 9/11, actually. And I am a New Yorker. I was born and bred in New York, and my heart is still in New York. So when 9/11 happened, I was already in California, but I was very affected by it. And I started doing things to help people cope with terrorism. And now I'm doing volunteer work with Israelis, by Zoom, helping them cope with terrorism. And I've written 2 books on terrorism, and I speak, and I go around and speak, and I do media talking about terrorism. And for 9/11, I did these music videos. One's for 9/11, the anniversary, and one for October 7th. And for those anniversaries, I send mobile billboards around New York or Los Angeles or DC, and with these music videos. And it used to be that the music videos were sort of warm and fuzzy, like why we have to remember 9/11 and so on. But last year, I did it much more with a point of view to warn people that there are terrorists in our streets, and that Israel is just the canary in the coal mine. But they want all of us under Sharia law.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time to get into one of your other books.
Linked to a specific religion?
Is what? Say it again.
Is terrorism linked to a specific religion, is what you were just referring to with Sharia law?
Yes, terrorist is Islam. Don't tell me you're going to get...
Well, the definition of terrorist...
No, the Quran is... I didn't say that was the definition. You're asking me if it's connected to a religion, and I said, yes, Islam. I think we'll have to have another conversation, but I really would. Why don't you? There's a lot that you can read or listen to.
There are, however, in Morgan's defense, there are survivors of the Nazi Holocaust who are very upset at what Israel is doing right now, and then defending it in the name of the Holocaust. And they are on speaking tours all across the United States and around the world.
There are, unfortunately.
So that means that it's not cut and dried, as you would seem to say.
No, absolutely not. They are a minority. I'd really like to. I can't get into it now, and so
that's
I don't.
Right, Dr. Carroll. We're going to respect your time.
The time commitment. But if Dr. Carroll is interested in debating this, let's schedule another talk where we have time to hash it out.
Yeah.
If people want to follow you, you're on X.
I just want to say this. Yes. Dr. Carroll, MD. Yes, right. I just want to say one thing. I have been studying this and working with people on this since 9/11, and doing a lot of work every year with the survivors, with warning people about what's coming, warning people about what's happening in Europe, where terrorist radical Islamist migrants have taken over. So it's not like something like a casual conversation for me. I've been doing this for 24 years.
Nor
right.
Also for others, but thank you very much for your time, Carol, and definitely we'll have to revisit this in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Carroll, and we wish we had time to find out what makes me a bad boy or Ryan a bad boy, and whether or not
you got to be bald.
Morgan. I know what you might think makes Morgan a bad girl, but that's not the topic. All right.
I do have a book, Bad Girls. Yes. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care now.
All right. Now, speaking of
bad boys,
here he is, Ray McGovern.
Our
Hi,
favorite
Ray.
CIA analyst and bad boy. How you doing, Ray?
Good. Well, I'm actually appalled by your former guest. Don't you vet these people?
Let's get the volume up on Ray for a second here before we move on.
Don't you vet these people?
Well, we weren't going to talk about that issue. We were just going to talk about homelessness. Or is that the part that appalls you?
She wasn't clear on that either. Let me add my own comments on that.
Please, Ray.
Right. There's a tradition called the Abrahamic tradition, which includes the Hebrew, the Christian, and the Muslims, and they trace their religion or their heritage back to a religion and a language that defined justice. The word in the Hebrew scriptures for justice is tzidkah. Its denotation, not connotation. Its literal meaning is justice, means showing mercy to the poor. Okay? Now that's what we're called to do. That's what Abraham, that's what Yahweh of the Old Testament, Jesus, that's what the prophet instruct their people, whether they do it or not. Those are the instructions, okay? Now, Hamas, Islam, they're terrorists, says your former guest. My God, how ignorant is that? Do you know why Hamas is so popular? You know why Hamas beat the Palestinian Authority to its knees in the election in 2007? Because they take care of the widow, the orphan, and the poor. That's their shtick, okay? When the Israelis oppress them, yes, they sometimes resort to violence. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of put a little justice perspective on that, because that's what I care about. And you don't have to be a religious person. Most people have an instinctive desire not to marginalize other people, like the homeless or emigres or immigrants or this kind of thing. But, it's really important. I don't talk about the homeless. I talk about people who don't have proper living conditions because we spend all our money building armaments that don't work. So I imagine your audience is smart enough to know most of that. But I just thought I'd make the point that I was appalled by Dr. Carol Lieberman. She's a real easy act to follow. Ask me something else.
Well, how is it that you're blaming homelessness on spending money on weapons?
No, I don't think he's doing that.
No, wait a second. I can answer that.
Okay.
There's a
let me tell you what I'm interpreting. Maybe I misunderstood. Ray said something about that it's caused by spending money on armaments. Isn't that?
That's exactly right. Yeah. You have enough money. You have a pie chart, right? And you have a lot of money coming in tax money. Okay. Now, discretionary income, let's say it's 100%. What percent of that goes to building and selling arms? Do you know?
Well, too much.
53%.
But let's just cut to how you want money to be spent to address the homelessness issue.
I want some of that 53% be diverted to social programs like they used to have in Europe, that they have in Scandinavia still, to take care of people who need special help. We're not all created equal, actually. We have different abilities. And social programs are designed to bring people up to as level a playing field as can happen. You can't do that if you don't have the money. We squander our money on profiteers in the arms industry. You don't have to take it from me. I don't actually believe or obey everything that the Pope says, okay? Surprise, surprise. Well, the last guy, Francis, next to the last guy, he came to Congress, right? And in 2015, I think it was, he made a speech. And they were all there, all those representatives, all those presidents, they were all there, okay? Because there are a lot of Catholic voters out there. There's about 60, 70 million Catholics in the United States. Okay, so the Pope gets up and then he says something true. He says, the real problem, the most urgent problem in the world is the blood-soaked arms trade, end quote. And giving hypocrisy a bad name, all those people financed by the arms trade got up as a person and applauded, and then they looked in their little inside pockets to see if that envelope from Lockheed was still there and the one from Grumman, were they still? I mean, it was really giving hypocrisy a bad name. So let's face into the problem that these people are all bought. They're bought both by the arms trade and the people who suppress
Well,
the
I don't
people
think Dr. Carroll would not argue with you that it would be better to spend more money on mental hospitals. So when you say let's spend money on social programs, can you be more specific? Are you talking about something else?
Well, Dr. Lieberman didn't seem to be aware of anything other than the symptoms. There are homeless. There are people on the streets. Some people need mental help. What brings them there? What makes them homeless? What makes them without homes? And I'm trying to tell you that most of the federal budget goes to making arms. And if we took just a half of that, there would be no people without homes. There are no people without homes in Russia.
Right.
Can you believe that? I was
You say
there.
you want the money to be allocated.
I looked out
What are
in
the
the
social
rural
programs?
areas.
Well, hold on a
What's
second.
that?
Hold on a second. Let me, if I could. It's not just Ray, what you're saying about the spending on the weapons. It's also the decades-long taking down of the physical economy, sort of what I was beginning to allude to with the takedown of our entire Hilberton standard of healthcare, where we don't even maintain a robust, growing number of facilities per percentage of the population. It's extremely expensive, we're told. Here in Texas, we had another derailment. Sorry about that. I didn't know. We had another train derailment. You have these ongoing natural disasters because we don't maintain the infrastructure. Again, if you look at the latest report of the American Society for Civil Engineers, we don't pour any money into any of the infrastructure. So social programs, I do agree with you, but it's also just the maintaining and growth of the nation to sustain a healthy, growing population, regardless of if they have a mental illness or something. Isn't it also that?
The privatized medical system in our country is an outrage. I profit from this because I got money, because I worked for the federal government. I got almost free health care. Okay. Nobody else has that if they didn't have these special benefits. Now, when I go in and I have this expensive stuff done, I had an open heart surgery thing. Okay. Didn't cost me a cent. Now, I asked the doctor, I said, suppose I didn't have insurance. He says, well, there are places they can go. They usually end up in the street. Now, there's the problem right there.
Yeah.
Now, I was recently in Europe. I fell on my head in Oslo, Norway. I got on the plane anyway to go to London, okay? I got to London, and a friend of mine took me to the first hospital that she knew about, St. James Hospital, I think it was, part of the National Health Service. Okay, oh, you look terrible. What, did you lose consciousness? No. Okay, well, just put your name here and your address, and we'll call you. Do you want my passport? No, just your name and address. Okay. 10 minutes later, they call me. Long story short, they x-rayed me head to toe, even though I had not lost consciousness. They did all they even tried to fix this little broken finger. I had this arthritis, they took me back for x-ray. Can we straighten that out? I don't think so. All right. And then they asked me at the end of the day, this was 8 o'clock, look, the head doctor would really like you to stay here because it'd be good to have you. I said, would you want to stay? And I said, oh, of course. So they made me breakfast in the morning and shut me on my way. Now, they didn't even ask me for anything other than my name and my address. Somebody vouched for me. He talks funny because he's from America. So that's the National Health Service. What are they trying to do to that? They're trying to privatize that.
Right.
And it's in danger of going out of existence in its present form. So there's a lot, what I'm trying to say is a lot of greed. And the people without homes are the direct victims of the people who have too much greed. There's never enough for them, and there's also never enough for people living on the streets.
And you were just saying in Russia, of course, they're an industrial country, and they don't have this problem. A friend of mine there just recently tripped and tore his knee, and he described basically the exact same situation that you just did in terms of the care as well. So it's an overhaul of the United States. That's what we need, clearly. Well,
there's a lot of people that are making a lot of money on the system as it exists. And what I object to, of course, is when the victims of these structures are treated as sort of people that you have to deal with because they're out there, and what do you do with them? That was the tone I got from the doctor there, and I just I'm Irish. I really don't like that. I don't like injustice.
She might counter your point with an argument I've heard before, which I think actually has some merit. You were just talking about the financial incentive. A lot of people believe that these nonprofits in LA that get a lot of money to deal with homelessness never solve the problem, and they don't have the financial incentive to do it because they'd be out of business if homelessness was cured.
That's a meme that I don't give much credit to, Jeff. We can debate that at some other point, but there are all these kinds of explanations. Well, the homeless people or the people who are supposed to be taking care of them really are doing a lousy job. It's a much more core problem, and we're not going to address it here. But again, I thought that not only Hamas, but her attitude toward those people without homes was not what I think is the correct one. So.
Now, in that vein, you just wrote an article in Consortium News applying the lost art of Kremlinology. Very interesting article, and you're discussing the question of rapprochement. So the question I have for you right off the bat, Ray, is do you think that President Trump can learn from President Putin so that we can actually get somewhere on this question of rapprochement?
Well, what I know is what I've observed on the part of Russian and before them Soviet leaders for half a century, believe it or not. That's why I look so old, okay? I've been around. There is a discipline called Kremlinology. It's real hard to pronounce. It's even worse to pronounce in Russian, okay? And what it does is look at what Russian or Soviet leaders say, what appears in their official press or even their semi-official press, and you guide it from one day to the next. You see how it changes, and you see what they say about prospects for dealing with the United States. Now, I practiced that, so to speak, for 5 decades, even after I retired, okay? It's the best information you could possibly have on Russia, except for their military situation, of course, and the stuff that we get from the satellites. So as I watched all this debate about, Putin's going to take Trump to the cleaners, oh my God, this is awful. Why should they have this talk now? Nobody's prepared and all that stuff. Well, I looked at what the Russians are saying. Now, it's real easy to do Kremlinology on the Russian leaders. It's impossible to do it on Trump because he's got no discipline. He's going to say something one day, he's going to say the other thing the next. And the Russians take that into account. They say, well, people get emotionally overwrought, and then they say things. And let's see what they do. Let's see what they're prepared to discuss. So I keep track of what Putin or what Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov, his deputies, Chief Deputy Ryabkov, and what leaders of the Russian Duma say. Okay, and it's quite amazing. I mean, would you believe that it never appears in this Western media what these guys really say? Often, Putin talks for 4 hours. Now, he talks for 20 minutes, but then he entertains questions without any notes from all over Russia for the next 3.5+ hours. And Western correspondents don't stay around for that, nor do they read that. There's nobody in Washington that follows that. I know that because when I point out some of the things that are said 3 hours in, my God, they said that. So let me just say here that when Witkoff met with Putin, that was the 7th of August. Okay. Now on the 9th, I think it was the 7th or the 6th. Anyhow, 2 days later, the sanctions would have come in, Putin had this deadline from Trump. Okay, you stop the war in Ukraine or else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Well, or else meant bedlam in the international community if he even tried to levy these second level sanctions. Okay, so he needed a way out. He says, Witkoff, to talk with Putin, he said, look, okay, we're not going to try these sanctions. They don't work on you. The Indians are really ticked off about them. The Chinese don't. So look, we need something. Could we have a summit? And Putin said, well, you know my conditions for the summit. So, well, yeah, but, and then Witkoff talked with Putin for 3 hours, okay? Now, I don't know what kinds of sweeteners Witkoff gave to Putin, but he came around, and does he think that the U.S. is sincere and serious? Well, he sure acts like he does. He said yes to the summit, and more particularly, he's out on a submarine in Murmansk, in the real north of Russia, and he's addressing the sailors. He's sitting at a desk with no notes, and the sailors are around him. And this is really precious. One petty officer, okay, one petty officer. See if I have it here. He asks, look, tell me about Russian-U.S. relations. I'm really worried about what will happen out of these. And this is what he says here. If I can find it here.
Life.
Well, I lost that page of my notes, but what he says basically is, look, we think, and he says this specifically, we think Trump is sincere. We think he wants to end the war in Ukraine. And he says he does. He keeps saying in every speech, it's not my war, it's Biden's war. And Putin has mimicked that by saying, "Это война Байдена." Okay, война и мир, war and peace. Война, war. Okay, it is война Байдена, genitive singular. Biden's war. Okay, and then the next thing Trump always says is, "I want to stop the killing." You know, sotto voce. I want to claim some credit for stopping the killing. So here's Putin looking at this, and he says, well, now I bailed him out. I pulled his chestnuts out of the fire on these sanctions, on this deadline he had. No deadline anymore. So yeah, sure, I'll go to Alaska and see what the lay of the land is. Maybe he'll finally be persuaded to say, all right, definitive no to Ukraine coming into NATO. Now, if he's willing to do that, you know, and if he's willing to say, all right, we won't send any more arms or intelligence to Ukraine, well, I think we might be able to meet him, not halfway because we're winning, but we might be able to talk about things. Maybe we'd stop before we get to the Dnieper River. You know, we're such on a roll. He's really got no cards to play, but he wants to play them anyway. So let's play the cards. Maybe we can make a ceasefire that makes sense to us as well as to everybody else. So what I ended up telling, Toss called me, last 5 days ago and said, do you have a statement? And I said, I haven't even thought about it, but I think that if the West agreed to table this thing and say, okay, Ukraine will not be part of NATO, and if the U.S. said, all right, we're not sending any more arms, the Europeans can try if they want. They could buy arms for us, but no, we're not going to, and we're not going to authorize any of our satellites to send the information necessary to make these longer range missiles work by the French or the British or whomever. I think that under those circumstances, there might be a possibility for a limited ceasefire. Now, these are just things that I glean from their statements and from the realities of the situation. The Russians are advancing more quickly in the western part of Donetsk than ever before. They have already surrounded Pokrovsk, which is a key hub. So it's just a matter of how slow they go or how fast they go. The Ukrainians are running out of men. Yeah, equipment, don't have any missiles, no air defense, but they were also running out of men. One of the, it was RFE and RL. I mean, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty that reported that there was something like, 12 Ukrainians to defend a mile strip of territory. So the end is coming. Now Trump has a choice. Will we end the thing? Will Putin give him enough lipstick to put on this pig of defeat for the West? I think he will. Why not? Why would Putin want to continue this thing? Now, if people say, like Fiona Hill and these people, I'll spare the adjectives, who are trained by people like Richard Pipes, who drank Persophobia from his mother's breasts, if they think that Putin's idea is to conquer all of Europe, as they apparently persuaded that nitwit Joe Biden. I mean, Biden said, how many times do you think the Russians will stop Ukraine? No. Poland will be next, and then the Baltic. Well, hey, people who are listening to this program, please know the Russians already stopped.
Ray, everything you said makes sense, but I want to ask you to clarify something
Sure.
that I saw in your article, and maybe I didn't understand it. Maybe you didn't mean it literally, and I don't want to take it literally if you didn't mean it that way. So yeah, I agree that Trump kind of backed himself into a corner by giving this ultimatum to have a ceasefire by a particular date. But I think what you said was that very explicitly, I think in your article, you said that Witkoff was, asking to be bailed out. Trump needs to save his ass. We need you to save his ass. Did you mean that literally? And if so, how did you conclude that?
Okay. Now, you wouldn't expect Witkoff to say that. So this didn't come from a statement. But here you have, I think it was I should have the exact date right. It was the 8th or the 9th. Let's say it was the 8th that was the deadline, okay?
8th, right.
It was the 8th, okay. So what happens? The place is going crazy. Nobody knows what to expect. The sanctions are going to work on the Russians or anybody else. The deadline is coming for Putin to stop the war or else. And Trump has got chestnuts in the fire that somebody's got to pull out for him. So he sends Witkoff 2 days before the deadline. Well, that's not an analytic leap. I mean, and when you come in with Witkoff and he spends 3 hours and the outcome is something that Trump has been wishing or wanting, he wants to have Putin and him in the same photo together. And who knows what kinds of undertakings, tentative ones, were done there. But that's exactly what I meant, Jeff. I thought it would come clear that was my inference from all these developments and from what people have been saying. But yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Putin bailed Trump out. What do you hear about sanctions anymore? Well, apparently, Witkoff says, look, if you do these things like a summit first and foremost, then we won't do the sanctions. I can just Putin say, oh, God, thank you so much. We were so afraid of those sanctions. Give me a break. The sanctions have just made Russia's economy stronger, and some people are telling Trump that the Russian economy is weak and the Russians are losing millions of soldiers on them. I don't know who's telling them. I hope not my old colleagues at the CIA, but the president is not very well informed on some of the basics. But I think
what do you think about Witkoff?
Well, I think Witkoff is 10 times smarter than Rubio. Now,
I totally agree with you there.
That's damning with Saint praise. I mean,
yeah.
But
Witkoff is an interesting character. I know that he was a real estate person, right? That's
look, he owned all the apartment houses in my part of the Bronx.
Oh, okay.
back in the 50s and the
Yeah.
60s and the 70s.
That's
Yeah,
not
I
the
know.
typical resume for being the nation's chief diplomat, right?
Right, yeah.
He knows how to make a deal. Maybe that's the issue.
Yeah.
Well, he's a hard-nosed guy, and he's probably gotten Trump out of some fixes of Trump's own making. They're close friends, and he came in swinging. In some instances, he got flexibility from even Netanyahu initially, so he knows how to make deals. Rubio isn't quite on that par. So, and Trump, not Trump, but Putin has met with Witkoff how many times now?
I think like
5
4 or 5.
times.
Yeah.
My God, that was the 5th time, this most recent one. So this is one way to deal. I mean, Kissinger did the same thing when he was not Secretary of State. He pretty much acted as Secretary of State. And ironically, Rubio is in that position now, being both National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, but also ironically, Witkoff is doing the heavy lifting. So bottom line here is that lots of people are criticizing Trump for doing this. I don't think their criticism is very coherent or justified, but they happen to be most of my colleagues. Most of my colleagues can't think of anything good that could come out of this, but I can. And the very fact that two people who have nuclear weapons are beginning to talk after 4 years, and that's enough for me.
Well,
That's real progress. So that's where now I may be totally discredited this time tomorrow when they have a food fight in the
Let me just follow
cafeteria.
up on that, Ryan, before you jump in.
Okay, sure.
Because it's on the subject of some of your allies not necessarily being on the same page as you are, Ray. I saw you on Judge Knapp's great show. I want to just say it's almost unbelievable how many interviews with great people he does every day. It's just awesome. And you were on with Larry Johnson about 5 or 6 days ago, and it seemed to me that both Judge Knapp and Larry were kind of ridiculing Trump for supposedly inviting Zelensky to this meeting and then uninviting him. And I think you jumped in and said, wait a minute, that didn't really happen. It was just something that was mentioned. And that's when I said, this is why I love Ray McGovern. He criticizes Trump when it's appropriate, but he doesn't have TDS, and he's not going to criticize him if he doesn't deserve it. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, Jeff, thanks very much. Yes, you are. And the reason is that there was a readout done by Ushakov, who is Putin's right person. And he said various things, but he also said the subject of meeting with Zelensky was mentioned, but it was not discussed in any length. And that's not part of this deal. I mean, he said that right in the readout. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what happened? The press and the people that want to sabotage this thing said, "Oh, Zelensky's got to take." How could you? It's got to be Ukraine. With Ukraine, nothing happens without Ukraine, And so Trump did tell the Europeans, I'd like Zelensky maybe to take part at some point, but Trump never said Zelensky is also agreed upon with the Russians that we're going to be. So Larry was reading, the press and the people who were trying to embarrass Trump, and I just got under my skin. And this is not the first time, because I have this disciplined approach to Russian foreign policy. I don't know of any better approach, and I've been around for a while. And if people don't set any store by what the Russians say, and then by what they do, like come to Alaska, then, what do they depend on? Well, the fear of, the meme is Trump is stupid. He doesn't know what he's doing. That doesn't matter. I think he's smart enough to realize that Putin is the only guy that he has to deal with for the next 3 years, his last 3 years. And Putin looks at Trump exactly the same way. And Putin, I am convinced, knows the horrors of war. He's from Lenin. He's from St. Petersburg, right? And his father was almost killed in the war. His mother was left for dead in a pile of bodies. When his father heard about that, he dragged her out of the pile of bodies. And his little brother, that is Putin's little brother, well, he was only 2, and they didn't have any food for him. And there was one hospice that were treating children without food. So his mother gave up her 2-year-old to this hospice. Never saw him again. None of them had any food. And when Putin was asked before this big cemetery holding almost 1,000 bodies from people who perished in the siege of Leningrad, 900 plus days, he was asked, "Where's your brother?" And he said, "Well, he's over there somewhere." Now, I have a brother's buried. I have 2 brothers that are buried. I know where they are. They weren't victimized like, his name was Vitya. Yeah, Vitya was his name. So all I'm saying is Putin knows about war. The Russians know about war. And they know that we don't, okay? They know that our president had a bone spur, right? And so he didn't know anything about war. He wasn't even in the Texas National Guard, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So aren't we lucky that we don't have a macho guy in the Kremlin that's swinging his weight around, but is rather perspicacious and says, all right, look, we've got to live with these people. Let's try to talk some sense into them. And I think that's what this is all about. Is it Anchorage where they're meeting?
Yes.
Some military base
Yes.
there. Yeah. I was thinking Anchorage is where high Chinese leaders came in to meet with Blinken and Sullivan, and that went very, very poorly. That was in the second month of Biden's administration. Bad precedent. Let's keep it on this military base and out of that hall where they went at it like sophomores in a food fight.
Right.
Go ahead.
If I may,
Go ahead, Morgan.
speaking about sabotage, we have Steve Witkoff that you say that he's better than Rubio. I would agree with you on that. But there is this one individual that has come back onto the scene, and his name is Keith Kellogg. General Keith Kellogg, which those of you guys do not know, his daughter, Megan Mobbs, owns a NGO called RT Weatherman, which its sole purpose is to make basically profit from the war in Ukraine. They so-called funnel medical supplies to the front lines. She is very tied to the continuation of this war. So much so that when Trump initially had Keith Kellogg on the envoy back in June, you had the Russian government actually plead with Donald Trump to kick him off. And Donald Trump actually heard those cries and took back the roles of Keith Kellogg. But now he's actively back on the scene. He was at the Coalition of the Willing, where the EU met with J.D. Vance and Keith Kellogg, and they were speaking about the demands that must be met before this negotiation. One of them is that Russia cannot veto the access of Ukraine has to the EU and to NATO. If you could just speak on that, this whole thing, when this first broke out, when the Ukraine war first broke out, you had media puppets, the government, the Biden administration basically saying this has nothing to do with NATO. And now we're just open about how this is basically, what it is about. That we can't take that off the table. And another thing that I thought about was the interview that Putin had with Tucker Carlson, where he spoke in basically a very rattling way that he had tried to, which we don't know if this is true or not, tried to get into NATO twice under 2 different presidencies. And the presidents were, okay, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's negotiate that. And that someone up above the president ultimately stopped that. So if that is in Putin's mind, what do you think, that if that's in his mind and going into this negotiation, how is he going to maneuver, knowing that a lot of what Trump says isn't the end game, that there might be a person in the suit and tie above Trump that ultimately calls the shots?
Yeah. Well, on the admission to NATO, that's true. Putin did ask Bill Clinton. Okay, and Clinton's not. What? You come into NATO? Oh my God. Well, I have to talk to my people. So that night, Clinton comes back and says, "Well, I talked to my people." No, that's not on the court. We can't do that. Okay. So who are his people? The people connected with the defense armaments industries, people who make the money in the treasury and all that kind of stuff, the people who like to see profiteering possibilities in war. So that's the way that went. Now, what else? I can't read my writing here. Something says, well, let me just talk about Kellogg. Kellogg is from hunger. That's a Bronx expression. Kellogg has been around too long. One of his bright ideas recently was to put submarines, armed missile submarines, up and down both coasts of the Russian to show that make sure that they know we're not bluffing, or to call Putin's bluff. Now, how's that parsed? I don't know. Now, the sins of the father shouldn't be visited upon the daughter. And I suppose it should go the other way too. The sins of the daughter shouldn't be visited on the father. But Kellogg, in my view, is useful to Trump because he can cite what Kellogg says to fend off the real neocons. Says, look, I still got Kellogg, you know. Kellogg says crazy things. Witkoff does the heavy lifting. And, you know, that's a good thing because you don't have much that you can rely on within these institutions like the State Department. Right? It's crazy now with Rubio there and all that stuff. So to the degree that Witkoff is doing that kind of pioneering for Trump, I find that a good thing. I think he's a smart guy. He's not invariably right, of course, but he does what he's supposed to do. Now, as far as the coalition of the willing, it's the coalition of the brain dead. That's what I call them.
I agree.
These people are really stupid. I mean, think about it, okay? Trump pretty much says, look, we're out of here. We're not going to supply any more weapons to Ukraine. Now, if you guys want to do it and you want to buy the weapons from us, no problem. Buy all the weapons you want from us. It's a thrifty business. We will profiteer and see what you can do. We tried to the tune of $250 billion, and we couldn't do it in 3 years. Maybe you guys have better success. Give me a break, my God. So that's where they are. These people kind of bubble up in their party bureaucracies, and they don't know a thing about foreign policy, and they're pretty dangerous folks if they're given their head. Now, the big thing here is that the Germans and the U.S. have a bilateral agreement to put back intermediate range ballistic missiles in Germany. I mean, the treaty that Scott Ritter inspected and verified that not only prohibited but destroyed a whole class of intermediate range ballistic missiles in place, ready to fire, together with their armaments, okay? In, 1987, if memory serves, okay? That lasted 33 years, okay? What happened? Well, somebody told Trump, maybe John Bolton or some person like that, said, hey, we'll get out of that thing, you know, just like George Bush Jr. got out of the ABM tree. Oh, we got this one. Yeah, that'll be good. And then we can build all these kinds of intermediate strike weapons. Well, you know, that was really stupid. The Russians said, okay, look, we think this is bad, but we're going to do our self-imposed moratorium. And now, just last week, they said, moratorium is over. And I see that as a real clear overture. We need to talk about this. There's no need for us to go back to the situation that existed in the 80s, where the person in Moscow had about 10 minutes best, as few as 6 or 7 minutes to decide whether to retaliate and, in effect, blow up the rest of the world. They don't want that, okay? Putin doesn't want that. Military people and the people who profiteer on these things might want that because there's a lot of money in it. Anyhow, Putin understands all that. The grace is, and I say this having watched Soviet and Russian leaders for more than 50 years, he's cool, calm, and collected. He sees his country's interests first and foremost. He's not braggadocio, and he sees a possibility that this guy Trump at least says he wants to cut a deal. Okay, now he'll find out more. Is it tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow in Anchorage, right? And if Trump is either unwilling or unable because of these other forces working on him to make a deal, well, that's too bad for the U.S. because what Putin will say, okay, well, look, we don't want to go into Western Ukraine, but you give us no choice. We'll go to the Dnieper River first, and then maybe you can think about it a little bit more. Right now, we're willing to do a deal. We can, do something. Yes, we can do some Kharkov. We can, yeah. But then, a couple months from now, you're not going to have any Eastern Ukraine, and so maybe you ought to think about that. And when we get back together in Russia, the next summit, which is already invited, the Russians have invited Trump. We'll get back together. We'll figure where we'll go from here. But reality has to dawn on these people, and I'd like to be able to say that our military will read them the Riot Act, how dangerous it is. But I don't trust our senior military farther than I can throw them. Talking
Ray,
about taking terrible stuff.
Last night on Ask the Inspector, Scott Ritter actually addressed exactly what you're talking about with the INF treaty. He said that also there are the bilateral agreements with the British and the Germans and the British and the French around new kinds of nuclear weapons, and therefore they are not, Russia's that is not going to discuss taking Oreshnik off the table, for example. It's going to be much more difficult to have a bilateral agreement with the United States under conditions where Europe, as Morgan and you have just discussed, is hell-bent on continuing that conflict. So that was one thing he said. And he also said that President Putin is well aware of the forces that Trump has to deal with. So that's not, Americans don't get that. They get that. The other thing that Scott said, before I forget, is he said that there was an opportunity for you to be on this discussion with TASS, and that he wanted to make sure that you got the apology.
I told him already.
Yeah. Okay. That they didn't send you.
The other thing is that before you respond to that, I wanted, for those who don't know, that we did talk to Scott last night, but we should also, for those who don't know, that Scott is in Moscow right now. And I want to ask Grace something else about that, but why don't you respond to what Ryan said first?
Ryan, refresh my memory. What was your question?
Well, I was just simply saying that Scott mentioned that things like Oreshnik will not be on the table in a future treaty discussion, given that the British, the French, the Germans are making new arrangements with nuclear missiles and other types of weapons in this category. That simply an arrangement with the United States is no longer sufficient.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. Things get diverse, and you have China also in this mix. So, yeah, it'll be difficult, but I've watched situations like this in the past. Where there's a will, there's a way. And when you have an earth-shattering, unprecedented, first in the world agreement where a whole class of nuclear-capable missiles are destroyed in place, and again, Scott supervised Votkinsk, the crazy place. Watch them, take the saws, tear these things apart. Okay, well, once that happens and they renege on that, then there's a lot of fear that they could be reneging again. But it looks like, in my view, the Russians, as long as it could be verified as well as concluded. Trust but verify, doveraj, no proveraj, the whole thing, it could be done. Yeah, Jeff, you had a question.
Yeah, the other thing that Scott mentioned is that the fact that he's there while this summit is happening in Alaska is for Scott kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, Scott had planned to meet with some high-level people who are very closely aligned with Putin, but he's not now because they're with Putin, or they were planning for the trip to Alaska, and then they're going to be going there with him and so forth. So that was the downside. The upside is that it's just brought more attention to his visit. He's doing tons of media. And, I referred to Woodcoff before as our nation's chief diplomat. I would refer to Scott as our nation's chief citizen diplomat. And he was very optimistic and excited about the bridges that he's building there. So I'm wondering if you agree with me about that characterization of Scott, and if you have anything to say about the significance of his visit and the significance of Scott in general.
Sure. As you know, I admire Scott greatly. He and I have been friends since before the Iraq War, for God's sake. What he's doing is citizen diplomacy. He's not going to stop at it, and it's necessary. We used to have these B teams that used to negotiate. I don't know if they exist anymore. But Scott is certainly qualified. And I have to tell you, this is not a big, deep secret, but when I was with Oliver Stone in Moscow for the 80th anniversary celebrations at the end of World War II, Oliver was talking with very, very high-level people, the highest, actually. And I get to see people just beneath that level. And at one point, Oliver says to me, we need something on arms control, something that I can, kind of put in the right pocket, on arms control. Can you have Scott Ritter write me something? Naming Scott. So I'm on the horn right away with Scott. Sure, yeah, when do you need it? Well, we only have 3 days before the 9th of May when the big celebration is. He's going to need it before then. All right, well, here's a draft. Well, we go over the draft. I said, send it out to the rest of the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity with a request for urgent approval. We got that within 3 hours, for God's sake.
He works fast.
Sent it back, published it on Consortium News. I ran it off at this printer. They had this fancy hotel where I was staying, right? And even though in the end, well, it turned out to be 3 pages, and that's a little bit more than I could count on Oliver distributing to the kings and the princes and presidents that was consorting with after the parade, right? But McGovern had his own copy. And I got it in the right hands, I tell you. And I'm very happy about that because they know who Scott is. They know that he speaks the truth and that he knows more than anybody else on these particular questions. They're not proud to tell the truth. So I was really, for an example of the trust that Scott enjoys from Oliver Stone, for God's sake, right, and from these people who are delighted when I put it in the right pocket. Okay. So that's, that's all to his credit. And curiously enough, I'm in the parade, I'm not in the parade. I'm watching the parade for really neat seats. When you travel with Oliver, you get really neat seats. And then I get this message on my iPhone. Where the hell are you sitting, McGovern? It's Scott. He said, look behind you. Behind me, 2 rows behind me. You may know this, Jeff, but was the head of the Senate, the head of the House, Medvedev, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. One other, who was it? Medvedev. Oh yeah, the president and the prime minister of Russia. They're all 2, and the camera just panned us, and they didn't get Oliver. So here I was, the big VIP, sitting in 2 rows ahead of him, by God's sake, to watch the parade.
Yeah, we saw that picture. You had the best seats, pretty much.
So Scott would say, what the hell are you doing, McGovern, up there, So And that was interesting because we did talk to those people, and I made friends. Well, at the end, when people were leaving, they were playing Katyusha, Расцветала яблони в груши. And of course, this is the old World War II song where the young Devushka is sending a letter to her boyfriend on the front. It's very, very compelling, actually. Everyone knows it in Russia. I know it as well. So I'm singing this song, and the guy in front of me turns around and says, "Oh, you got a good voice. Who are you?" I explained who. I said, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm the Minister of Health." "Oh, oh, that's nice." So here's the Minister of Health, and then other people were doing little interviews as we came by. Xi Jinping walked right in front of us with a couple of, it's kind of a gaggle of people. No big ceremonies, no. It's really quite interesting. I had seen that kind of thing before, but the informality of it, as Putin walked, not marching or not surrounded by anybody except the gaggle of folks who were in his retinue to do homage at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier around the corner of the Kremlin. It was really kind of very, very enlightening. And I would say one more thing. You may remember that before the celebration, the 80th anniversary celebration, Trump says, we won that war, The Russians helped a little bit, but we're the strongest then and we're the strongest now. For God's sake, it's crazy. Most of your listeners know, I'm sure, that the Russians won that war. We helped, we helped a lot. Look at the casualties, 27 million Soviet citizens dead. Our casualties were all military, 420,000, not million. Okay. Anyhow,
it's incomprehensible.
There was all this stuff about, don't go to Moscow. They said, oh, they didn't win the war and all that stuff. So I'm saying to myself, Ray, what's Putin going to do? In his speech, he could be really snide, or he could raise the statistics, or say, as izvestno, as everybody knows, But you know what he says? He said, the third paragraph, we welcome the entrance of the Allies on the Western Front. It was a great help to the victory. Now, we had already had decisive battles inside Russia, but we welcome and we remember that, and not only those, but the Chinese. Well, you want a lesson in magnanimousness, if that's a word, or kind of a class act. After all this abuse, here's Putin saying, yeah, it was really neat to have those guys come in the Western Front. A little late, but he didn't even say that. I would have expected him to, but no. So that's a mark of the man. I think we're damn lucky to have him in place. I hate to think of what would happen if something happened to him, because I don't know if there's any likely successor who would be so circumspect and so judicious in dealing with the West.
He's also said that that is part of what is going on with this special military operation, is that the future leadership of Russia is being discovered.
Well, the veterans are being given good jobs, being welcomed home. When I see the contrast between the way we welcomed home our veterans from various wars, it's really very, very depressing. But the economy is purring. They have an inflation problem, but they adjust for that. They're run by people who have their heads screwed on, right? And you can call it, less than a democracy if you want, but, Putin does stand for election. He consistently has 80% support from the polls. I've not seen anything like that. These are real polls, these are not fake polls. So it'll be interesting to see how he probes Trump, what he's willing to offer him, because he doesn't want to have to take over all Ukraine. Now that's a real big important, because that gives Trump a little bit of leverage. Okay, so we make a deal, and Trump keeps talking about land transfers, but I don't know if they'll get into that on this first meeting. I rather think they'll maybe set up working groups to work on arms control. That would be a good idea. And maybe this business about Ukraine joining NATO will kind of float by and be concretized. In other words, it's a very short step because last year at the NATO summit, the sentence was with Blinken and Sullivan, Ukraine has an irreversible path toward membership in NATO, end quote, okay? Now, what did the communique from the summit just a month ago or 2 months ago say at the summit? Oh, it forgot to say anything about that. Now, no, I was going to say nobody noticed that, but me. No, there were probably some other people. Nobody wrote about that. I said, wait a second, what about Ukraine? What about this irreversible path? Well, it wasn't there anymore. So it's just a short step now, in my view. Trump, having already said, mind you, I can understand where the Russians would be very worried to have a NATO-equipped armed army right on there. I think I can. It was a very short step for Trump to say, okay, I will say definitively that Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. And besides, we're not going to give any more arms and we're not going to give any more intelligence. Now, in return for that, my guess is, and this is what I told Tass 5 days ago, that Putin might say, okay, well, on those conditions, we're agreeable to a limited ceasefire. Okay, it's not going to be 50 days, and we're not going to reduce it to 10 days or maybe 5 days. No, it'll be negotiated 30 days, and we'll see what can happen on the front. And meanwhile, we promise not to take all the territory east of the Dnieper River.
Ray, the thing about your, I'm sorry to cut you off there.
No.
The thing I appreciate most of all about everything that you have said, and I've been in something of a fight with people about this, is that you do have a realist view, but you also are willing to entertain the possibility that something good could happen. And I think that that's not a little thing. I think that's very important to be open to that, because if you just assume Trump is going to screw it up, for example, then you don't allow yourself the potential that President Putin, for example, could come up with something very interesting in this process, like what you're describing right now.
Yeah, just let me. I ended my little piece here in Consortium News, which is up there on the top of things today, with a comment that I got under the last piece I had written for Consortium News, and it was by a tweeter named @LastBloomer. Okay, and the title was, "Is it just me?" And here's the text. It's very short, but it points out where we should be on this issue, it seems to me. Okay, hey Ray, is it just me? I'm getting the vibe that the Financial Times and other media, they're pining for a Trump failure. Now, is it just me, or is it true that it is a win? It is a win when leaders of nations can meet and discuss the cessation of war. Isn't that a win? Huh, Ray? Is it just me? So there we are. They're getting together to talk about ending a war. Why don't we just give them a chance and see what happens tomorrow? Now, McGovern may be proven all wrong tomorrow, and that's happened before. Okay, but
well, are we going to know Ray? Are we going to know immediately about what was accomplished at the meeting, or is it going to take some time? Do you think?
Well, all I know is that Alaska's five hours behind us, right? So if we're on the eastern coast, take that into account. I would imagine that by 8 o'clock our time tomorrow, we'll have some pretty good preliminary readout. Very often the Russians go right to the press as soon as they finish with Trump to get on record their readout. What happened. So yeah, I think we'll know pretty much how the first session went. That is tomorrow's. pretty soon. Now, whether it goes another day or whether they schedule the next meeting in Russia, whether that those kinds of things are working groups set up.
Oh, you think it could extend to a second day? I mean, even though
Well,
one
I
day is
just don't know. I haven't read that anybody has circumscribed it to one day, but that's
Yeah.
probably what you're thinking, and that's probably true. But if it did go a second day, well, there's precedent for that too. We almost abolished all nuclear weapons in Reykjavik.
I asked Scott last night how Russians feel about the meeting being in Alaska, because it occurred to me that maybe they'd be like, well, maybe it should be on neutral ground instead of in the United States. And Scott said, no, they think it's a great location. It's equidistant, roughly, for the two of them. And they see some positive significance in it being in Alaska because it's actually pretty close to Russia and it might revitalize some cooperation across the Pacific.
Right.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, exactly right. The two islands the two groups of islands are just 2.4 miles apart in the Aleutian Islands. Now, those are really just heaps of rock. But there have been talks about putting a tunnel under the Bering Sea. That's completely possible. If they could do it under the English Channel, they can do it there too. And one other thing is that China is right nearby. China knows how to do these things, okay? That would be wonderful if they got China, US, and Russia to cooperate on a project like that, which
Absolutely.
would mean a lot. People could get to the other country more easily, learn a little bit more about the other culture, as Scott is trying to get us all to learn about now. And so, yeah, why not be optimistic? Tomorrow we may have to be pessimistic, but for the nonce, here's to the whatever it is, the Alaska summit.
All right. And
Do you
Ray,
think that following the summit in the coming days and months, that maybe wine lovers in Russia and wine lovers in the U.S. could help perhaps bridge the cultural divide as just one way of developing relationships between
That would be a really very, very agreeable for me way to do it. This Martinez isn't really a wine thing, but I don't like wine as much as I like a Martinez. You know what a Martinez is, right?
oh no, what's a Martinez?
Well, if you have two of them, you have a martini, okay?
Okay.
Martinez is the Latin singular for Martinez. So if you're going to order a Martinez, that's good. But if you want two of them, order a martini.
Well,
It's
Ray,
like media. Is media singular or plural?
Media, that's plural.
Well, I want to take a page from your book, Ray, and say, "Na moj vzгляд, nam нужно иметь надежду."
Whoa, Nadezhdo, exactly, yeah. Now that could be read in two ways.
Don't talk
Ryan
about
just
Morgan
said-
like that.
No. What
he said, what
Ryan
it mean?
just said is, in his view, you have to have Nadezhda, that's hope, okay?
Ah.
Now, if he had said Nadezhdu, that would be the name of a woman named Nadezhda. Nadezhda is a very familiar Russian
Yeah,
name,
close.
okay? So be careful make sure you have the right
Надежда.
ending. Nadezhdu, yeah.
We learned
So,
so
hey,
much,
this has been-
not just geopolitics, but grammar and the whole shebang.
Thank you.
Well, all kidding aside, in Ushakov's readout, he said, well, the first thing I read was the English translation from the Russian script done by the Kremlin, okay? And it said, relations could get much better, okay, between the U.S. and Russia. And I said to myself, I wonder what verb they use for could, because it could be ambiguous in Russian, okay? So I looked it up, the original Russian transcript, okay? It said mogut. Mogut means can, okay? So it was a bad translation by the Kremlin. Can is much stronger. It's the indicative voice, if you will, not the subjunctive mood, okay? So it says relations can get much better. So relations could get much better, a little bit of subjunctive mood there. Ken is indicative, and okay, call me a pedant or accuse me of pedantry, but these things matter. And when you have a difference between
Words
can
matter.
and could, that
Yeah.
matters to me too. So use can. Don't use the original translation into English from a Kremlin guy who didn't quite know how Malgut should be translated. Right, you've got a good command of Russian.
I'm working on it, but
He's not as dumb as he looks.
I'm not nearly as good as I want to be, but I was told by some of my Russian friends I had to speak some. They said they used Dolzhin. I had to
You
speak.
had to, right?
Yes.
See, that's what I was looking for. Dolzhny. If it was
Right.
Dolzhny,
Dolzhny.
that would have meant relations have to improve. Well, that was not. That was not too strong. But can improve is better than could improve.
Yeah.
End of pedantry. I went to Jesuit school, so
So did
I'm
I.
really good.
Oh.
I'm good at this kind of.
Okay.
All right, well,
Ryan, where'd you go?
speaking of your
I went to Brophy College Prep in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, Phoenix. Okay.
Yep, Jesuit school there.
Yeah. So you know Latin. So you know what a Martinez is. Now you do anyway.
He does
I'm
now.
going to go and have a Martinez right now after this.
And I'm going to finish mine.
All right. Well, speaking of Ray's very carefully chosen words, you can follow them on his website, which is raymcgovern.com. And that makes a lot of sense for that to be your URL there. And you can also follow Ray on X at Ray McGovern. And many of his articles are published at consortiumnews.com, including the brand new article just published today. So thank you very much, Ray. It's always a pleasure to have you
Jeff,
on.
my son who does my website, who created it, and then at my request spent 2 weeks making it really easily searchable. Okay. There's a big search window in there. He tells me, Dad, when you do an interview like this, always mention that it's not just raymcgovern.com. It's easily searchable, raymcgovern.com. Really, for the last 17 years, he's been doing this, and he's done a really good job. So if you want to know what I said or thought or talked about on any specific subject, you'll get more than you bargained for, but you'll get it at least on raymcgovern.com. So thanks.
Thank you.
I remember your son well. When I lived in Los Angeles, he and I got together. And at that time in his life, he was living out of a van. Remember that?
Yeah, he took a tour of the United States at that time.
Yep.
He made a video called The Other Side, and he interviewed hardline rightists and neocons and all manner of people that some of whom he hardly knew, some of them who he knew from way back, and he made a film out of it, and it's really good. Look for it. It's called The Other Side, and he did this in a van with a little dog called Charlie, so it was really Travels with Charlie.
Oh.
He's a teacher now, and they got our youngest grandchild is his little girl. I'll say one more thing here in a family type thing. When I found out who the new Bureau of Labor Statistics was and how old he was, 37, okay? I got a grandson who's 40, for God's sake.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, right. So, holy Moses.
Hold on a second. You have a grandson who's 40?
Who's 40, yeah.
And how old are the parents?
Well, that one, they're 63.
Wow. And how old are you? 110?
Yeah, well, no, 109. I become 110 on the 25th.
That's right. You do have a birthday coming up.
I do.
Wow.
Don't forget.
What's the
I will
birthday?
not.
What date, Morgan?
Oh,
Tell
I'm
us.
not going to say, but it's between the
Morgan,
24th and the
you have to
26th.
have the last word on this. When is it?
You said the 21st, correct?
No, it's between the 24th and the 26th. I don't want to say.
Pardon me. But I also want to call out that you will be at an event, or virtually, I should say, this Saturday, commemorating the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In particular, this is a film viewing of 815 Hiroshima, that with the author of this book that was portrayed into a film, Dr. Akiko, will also be with you to speak on this tragedy and relate it to what's happening in Gaza. So I wanted to just call attention to that and encourage people to scan that QR code and sign up and purchase a ticket to listen Ray talk about it.
I know that story, and I've seen the film, and all I can say is don't miss it. It's made by the daughter of a survivor. And the way he survived, and it's just an incredible story. And she's one heck of a well-educated filmmaker or book writer and so. So don't miss it if you can.
Thank you.
Well, Ray is not an underage. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just saying I'll put it back up there again. And
Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to mention that Ray is certainly not an underachiever, and in fact, I would say you're a national treasure, Ray. And
Well, thank you very much. And so are you, Jeff, for standing by Scott Ritter and facilitating his good work. And you too, Ryan. And Morgan, not least you. You guys are doing a good job with this show. And I'm going to get some more martini now and say goodbye. And thank you for having me on.
All right, Ray. It's always a pleasure.
Post.
Take care, Ray. Ray has been on our show more than anybody, right? Is this the third or fourth time he's been on? I think third.
And it feels like always the first time, like it's just a breath of fresh air every time. So it's great.
Yeah, he's great. Absolutely. And I knew that when I asked him to comment on Scott, who's another national treasure, I knew that he wasn't going to disagree with me, but I didn't know exactly what he would say. And he didn't disappoint. I'll tell you, I've been working with Scott and Ray since the early 2000s. And back then we were organizing events, and there were other former CI analysts such as Mel Goodman who were involved in our efforts, Ambassador Ed Peck, the legendary Daniel Ellsberg also. And occasionally we would all get together, and it was always Scott that they seemed to revere the most. He was the one they were most eager to talk to hear his opinions, so forth and so on. And it's been quite a privilege to witness that over the years.
Well,
all right.
that was
fun.
That was a great show.
Yeah.
It was exciting. It was exciting.
And I'll be giving Dr. Carol your home address, Morgan, and you can expect a knock at your door soon. And I will attend.
Terrorist therapist, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I will attend your funeral and speak very highly of you. Yep. All right. Well, speaking of a funeral of sorts, I'm going to be a bad boy right now and do what Ryan asked me not to do, but it's the very end, so I think it's okay. And it's out of love. Ryan has been going through a tough time lately, and I want to just salute him for persevering. He had a dog he loved very much. He had to put to sleep a few days ago, who's been in your life, 14 years, Ryan?
Yes.
Yeah. And the dog's name is Ulysses. So I hope you'll forgive me, Ryan, for disregarding your wishes, but it is the end, and I'd like to finish tonight with a tribute to Ulysses.
Why won't you love me like my dog does, baby?